Hey everyone, how are you? Thank you for joining us at Popcorn Frights Wicked Weekend. We are here with Tibor Takács for the Opening the Gate discussion. How you doing, Tibor?
Very good, thanks.
My
Thanks
name
for the
is,
opportunity, Mark. Thanks.
oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. Thank you for joining us. My name is Mark Furman, co-founder, co-director of the Popcorn Frights Film Festival, and let's jump into this. Now, Tibor, you grew up in Canada, and much like myself, at a young age, you would go to the cinema like multiple times during the week to watch like new movies. For myself, going to the movies was a lifelong obsession, which has been really hard over the last 8 months due to the pandemic that has hit us. My question for you is, do you still share the same love for going to the theater as you did when you were a child?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I sort of always see it as a kind of a communal event. You really have a different experience when you see movies with other people. I mean, it's just undeniable, really.
And I
I,
actually, oh,
yeah,
no, go
no, but
ahead,
I,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, I need always bigger screen size seems to be what I'm always going for. Like the experience of seeing something on a big screen is a big difference for me.
Oh, it is for me too. And I remember going to see The Gate on the big screen, and I actually saw it as a double feature with Ernest Goes to Camp. Two films that definitely are not the same, but they actually are great to watch back to back. But it also showed what kind of taste I had as a kid. I just loved horror films. I liked comedies. And The Gate works on so many levels like that. It works as a horror film. It works as a kid's adventure. It works as a comedy as well. There's a lot of great stuff.
Yeah,
And
I mean, it always had a kind of a black comedic route.
yes.
Yeah.
How did Stephen Dorff get cast in the film? This was his first feature film.
We did a lot of kind of open casting. We had people submit. He came recommended. He had done a lot of commercials, I think, at the when he was a kid. And our casting director, was just one of the people that she brought. So, and he did really well. And we did a screen test.
All right. Now, another thing I learned that we have in common is you and I both shifted from working in music, in a music background, into film, where I was much more of a promoter, and I still am. You worked in the punk rock scene, punk and metal scene. What were some of the things that you learned from working in the music scene that you brought into the film, into your filmmaking? And also, your first feature film was a musical. Did your past play a big part in it going in that genre?
Well, it kind of, let's say, I've always had an interest in recording audio, like even when I was a little kid. From the youngest age, I don't know, we happened to have a tape recorder and I was always into creating sounds, and that eventually kind of morphed into a love of making films. And to me, they were both of sort of equal significance or importance, and an opportunity presented itself. I started in theater, which is kind of a combination of sound and movement, and an opportunity presented itself when we were staging one of our plays. A band, we were casting for a band, and I came across a band that really intrigued me, or a particular character who didn't quite have a band yet, but he was putting a band together. And that's how a couple of years later, we entered the music business, basically. My partner and I, Stephen Zoller,
Right.
the guy who put on the Metal Messiah, which was like my first film, but it was a play first. And it was through that play that we kind of got involved in the music business.
All right. Now, here's the funny thing is The Gate had one film in competition when it opened up, which is the notorious Ishtar. Even as a kid, I remember it being all over the news how big of a flop this film was. I mean, I wasn't someone who was watching Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman films at the time. I mean, yeah, I loved Tootsie as a kid. But with that film, with that film, do you feel it being such a huge flop helped The Gate that opening weekend? You know, find a bigger audience.
Well, in the opening weekend, I don't know if that really made a difference per se. I'm not sure if it was reviewed, if Ishtar was reviewed before it came out, but you know, I think from a business viewpoint, it attracted a lot of attention. Like, oh my God, what's this little film? How could it be in competition with a, you know, a giant Hollywood kind of supposed wannabe blockbuster that never made it? So it drew a lot of attention from the business side. I don't know if it helped at the box office per se, but in some respect, actually there is an aspect of it that it might have helped, in that a lot of the other studios kind of cleared the schedule to make room for Ishtar. And right. We happened to be scheduled in that weekend. So, you know, there was nothing else that was any good, maybe, you know, like that kind of thing.
There's always going to be alternative programming.
Yeah.
Even with the biggest of blockbusters, which Ishtar was predicted to be this massive hit. But when all came and done, it was going up against The Gate, and people were really enjoying The Gate, which was a great thing. And it was coming off
very different audience.
Yes.
Yeah.
And The Gate was just coming off, you know, just a few weeks before, had the release of Creepshow 2, which was a higher profile horror film, which was also very divisive. Not everyone loved Creepshow 2. So I believe people really were looking for a good horror film. I actually kind of like Creepshow 2, but, you know, it's definitely The Gate was by far a superior film.
Yeah, how close the releases were. I remember going to the theater on that opening day in Hollywood somewhere and seeing a big lineup. I just assumed that it was for Creepshow.
And it wasn't.
So so then I'm hearing people lining up, they're in the Creepshow line, but that's the line we got into. And we had no special arrangement with the theater or anything. We just wanted to see it like, you know, with a normal audience.
Right.
I go up to the box office and they say, oh, the Gate's sold out.
How did that feel?
I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. And then I explained who we were, and they said, oh, no, we'll find some room for you. You know, come on in.
Well, one of the things that I recently learned, and this actually shocked me, is you actually passed on one of my favorite, other favorite 80s horror films, which is The Wraith. You passed on that to do The Gate, I believe. Is it?
Yeah, well, it was just, it was a situation where the producer, you know, I came in kind of, I guess, very early in this like group of films that he was producing. And he had asked me what film I wanted to work on. And I read both and I chose The Gate. It just, you know, it just somehow appealed to me, you know, coming of age story. I felt there's a lot more I could do with it. And actually the way that I got to meet this producer was through a project that I was pitching, which also was kind of a kid's movie. It was a kid's horror movie, you could say. It's a post-apocalyptic movie where all the kids in the world, all the adults in the world die, and only people before under puberty were, you know, under 12 years old were basically left. That was it.
So around that time, the only film that really comes to mind with a similar concept of that is a film called Solar Babies.
Yeah. I have not, you know what, maybe I've seen it. I don't exactly remember that movie. But was that some sort of futuristic?
It was futuristic. It was post-apocalyptic. It was just the kids in the world, and I think they were all on roller skates.
Yeah, something wacky like that. Yeah. To me, it would be like Lord of the Flies, that was more akin to what we were trying to do.
Oh, see, that's impressive. Like Lord of the Flies is a classic story.
Yeah.
It's a great story. Now, you and Michael Nankin, right? Both worked on The Gate and The Gate 2, and having recently rewatched both films back to back, I love how the sequel does not try to copy the first film. It's a completely different story. It's a more grown-up story. It focuses on Terry, which is actually my favorite character in the series. And one thing I noticed about Terry is he loves punk and heavy metal. Was that carried over from your taste? Was that brought in a little bit?
Yeah, that was one of my contributions, I think, was the sort of more musical aspect of that. But and you know, we wanted to make something that was a real sequel. We just didn't want to retread the same story. You know, it was just one of those things that we felt, well, what would be a true sequel? We want to make a real sequel, you know?
I think some of the best sequels out there are the ones that don't just try to make this first movie again. They try something a little different. A perfect example to me are the Bill and Ted movies, where Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey went in a completely different direction. The Gate 2, you didn't go in a different direction, but the story grew. It got more mature. It got darker. Much like the same thing with the Harry Potter films. You know, as the kids get older, the story gets darker and more dangerous.
We wanted to sort of grow with the audience, so to speak.
Yes, and you went from the first film, which was a PG-13, and the sequel is an R-rated film. And the thing I find interesting about that is I think there's more graphic stuff in the first film than there is in the second.
Well, there was always a controversy about that. There was a lot of discussion whether the second one should be PG-13 or an R. We always thought, Michael and I for sure, thought that this was a PG-13 type movie. The concept, I mean, was always a PG-13 concept. Even Gate 2, I mean, you know, anybody more than 18 would or 15 would sort of be drawn to a story about kids digging a hole in their backyard or you know, finding demons in a hole. You know, it has a kind of an innocent quality to it, an immature quality in some respects, you know. So it is truly a you know, a tween kind of concept.
And was it a difficult decision to want to go and focus on Louis Tripp's character for the sequel?
It was never a big discussion about that. I don't know. It just didn't happen that way. I mean, the concepts that were pitched right away was kind of, you know, I think, yeah, it was just more about the concepts that we pitched were basically, we're more interested in doing a story about Louis. How are you going to continue the story? What was the most organic way to continue the story without being, you know, too contrived, so to speak? But there was like I was going to say, there was a controversy. The film Gate 2 was made as PG-13.
Right.
They wanted to give it this label. They thought they could, you know, get more of an audience, which is like totally ridiculous. I mean, you're like, what? How does that compare to Freddy? Come on, you know. It's like...
you know, it's funny is today we live in a time where like filmmakers have to fight to get their movie to be rated R. No, like studios don't want the films; they want the wider release. They want kids to go see it. I think it's funny. Like we live in a time where it's really hard to get an R-rated film released in horror film released in theaters. You know, I should mention,
in those days, they wanted it to be R because that was sort of a draw to it,
right?
You know?
And I should mention, like as I told you prior, is I was lucky enough to see The Gate 2 theatrically. I know it was only released in 350 theaters, and I think in Miami maybe 1 or 2 theaters had the sequel. The film was shot 2 years before it was released. Is that correct?
Yeah, there was all kinds of sort of issues about the promotion of the film, like how to get it out. This thing that you're talking about, there were, you know, the R and the PG-13. Post-production took a long time. One of the reasons I think was that there was some sort of shift in the Canadian dollar when we were doing our post, and suddenly we had a lot less money, you know, so sort of compromises and schedule changes had to be made. We couldn't be in such a hurry, you know, those kind of things.
Did you wind up having less money to work with on the sequel than you did on the first film?
No, actually we had more, but it was just like there was more going to fees above the line, you
Right.
know, that kind of stuff.
Because The Gate at the time was one of the highest grossing films in Canada. I mean, that and Porky's,
Yeah, yeah.
which I grew up with Porky's as well. So all three of them. Now, one of the things that I wanted to bring up is the forced perspective, which is like one of the standout traits from both films. Definitely something that always stuck with me. I love the forced perspective when you see the little monsters and you see them in the bedroom in the first film. I think the scene when in the sequel when the demon is in the cage and you see Terry in the bedroom walking up, and just the work that went into these shots and what it must have been like for everyone on set in the film in the cast. I mean, what was it like to shoot a lot of these forced perspective moments?
Well, it was, you know, a kind of a big endeavor, but you had to be very organized to be able to pull it off. And Randy Cook did an incredible job. He was very, you know, very particular about the details of everything. So we would you could only do a shot like that every 2 or 3 days. So in our 20-day schedule, I think, or something like that, you know, there's room for a certain amount of trick perspective shots. Like some sets could be reused a little bit, but typically it would take 2 days to prep and then shooting. So there was one stage reserved for regular shooting and the regular sets, and then there was the trick perspective stage, which used up a lot of space and had a lot of preparation to do because it was all done in camera. And you know, we prep all day and then suddenly shoot for like 5 minutes. You know, like as soon as Randy was ready, actors go in. Oh my God, we got to shoot this, get this over with. You know, in 10 minutes because the kids have short hours as well. You know.
And Lewis had experience in that with the first film, so of course he was prepared for what that would take for this.
Yeah, it was a little different in the second film because they were older and we had maybe more time with them, but still the kind of intense preparation for each shot, you know, it took time.
I always considered 1989 the year of the underwater science fiction horror film. You had Deep Star 6, you had Leviathan, you had The Abyss, you had all these different films that, well, The Abyss was a little different, but you had all these different films that had the same story. In 87, I look at that as the kids versus monsters years, where you had the Lost Boys, you had the Monster Squad, you had The Gate. And when I talk to people, I've been, you know, doing this for years, you know, hosting film events, not just premieres, but classics, retro screenings. And I ask people, like, what are the films that you grow up loving? And most of the time you hear everyone bring up The Gate, The Lost Boys, The Monster Squad. Do you feel that because the main characters are kids, and the people who grew up watching it were the same age, they relate to these films much more than something like A Nightmare on Elm Street or Friday the 13th?
Well, I think age stories always have a kind of natural draw and attraction people can identify, and there's a kind of crossover. You know, adults can enjoy it from a nostalgic viewpoint. Kids enjoy it because it's what they're going through at the time. I think that's the benefit of a PG-13 is that, you know, you can have both adults if it's made correctly and it's not just
right.
sort of like a dumb kids movie. It's actually, you know, kind of has mature themes in it, but it's geared for both adults and teens. Then, you know, it can work.
I know that it was talked about at one point that Alex Winter was going to direct a remake of The Gate. Now, I love Alex. I'm a Bill and Ted fan. He's a great documentary filmmaker, but I'm glad that project never actually moved forward. Now, I'm not sure if you would agree, but I think if The Gate was to ever be revived in some way as a sequel or as a reboot, do you think it would be more interesting that instead of making another film, do you think this would actually work as a series, like for a streaming service? I just feel like this is big world and you could focus on these characters and travel back and forth. I mean,
yeah, I think much like Stranger Things, I think it could have worked that way. Yeah, it could work.
is The Gate a film that you would a world that you would like to revisit?
Well, as a series, most definitely. That'd be kind of interesting. I don't know how the rights are tied up at the moment, but it's an interesting idea. There's it's a ground that's been well treaded already. Maybe maybe as a kind of a more juvenile version of it, kind of a tween show, maybe half hours, as opposed to the serious dramatic, because I always felt the premise is kind of, comedic.
It is.
I was involved in a series called My Babysitter's a Vampire, much in whatever, in that fashion. I think it could work, actually.
And if I'm not mistaken, you also directed an episode or two of Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
Yes, well, I did the original movie that the series is based on.
All right. So you're familiar with, the more juvenile kind of like monster film stories as well.
Yeah, I just feel like that the type of the way that The Gate approaches the subject is from a kind of a young teen perspective. And that's when you're most vulnerable and most open to those concepts that are in the movie. I mean, like I've always said, that it's a PG-13 concept,
I was 13 when I first saw it.
Yeah, there you go.
I was the right age. I made it right on that PG-13 line.
Yeah.
Now, as I mentioned before, The Gate and of course Porky's were a couple of the highest grossing films in Canada in the 80s. And I'm seeing a large number of horror films today coming out of Canada, doing the festival circuit, arriving on streaming services. There was I grew up loving Cronenberg's films like Shivers, Rabid, though I had never saw those theatrically. Those I'd seen on cable as a child.
Yeah.
I didn't start attending horror films in the theater till about 87. With the exception of maybe Poltergeist and Gremlins, which were also kind of family-geared horror films. With that being said, what is the big difference in the film production between 30, 40 years ago, and today in Canada?
Well, I feel like it's maybe much more democratic right now, where the entry barriers are sort of much less than they were back in the day. You can achieve a lot more technically with the resources, the finance that you might have. It's all evolved. Plus, I think that the Canadian film industry has kind of matured over time as well. And, we've got the genres, and we also have the more, serious filmmaking going on. So it's across the board. You've got sort of a more mature industry with lots of niches to plug into,
Right.
When I was making the films, it was more geared towards exploitation and, how can we sort of crack the US market and make filmmaking viable really in Canada,
And your film was also a cross with the U.S. and Canada as well. So it was put together by both.
Well, yeah, but it was a Canadian production, basically. Maybe the script originated in the U.S., but I'm a Canadian, and everybody who worked on the film was Canadian, pretty much.
All right. Well, between The Gate, which I'm a physical media guy. I love physical media guy. Between The Gate and The Gate 2, you delivered us another awesome film that I just have to quickly bring up, I, Madman.
Yeah.
You got to tell us a little bit about your experience on I, Madman. I'm surprising you with this question.
Oh, okay. Well, I, Madman came kind of, I guess, between the two movies. And it was sort of a continuation. When I finished The Gate, there was a lot of interest in, my directing. I had lots of scripts to read, but all of the scripts were basically just The Gate over again in a way,
Right.
but maybe not as good. And this just felt like something that was a little different.
It is. It definitely is.
Yeah, and I was able to leverage my agreement to that film to possibly do Gate 2. That was the other, that was a sort of a future thing. It was like a 2-picture deal. So that way it played well into what I liked.
And I, Madman is also a much more adult film.
Yeah.
It's a much more serious film.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know this about me, but I've always tried to make my career more eclectic. Like to me, like the kind of director that's a hero to me is like Norman Jewison, who covered the whole spectrum of all the genres,
Oh, so
Yeah.
Are you telling me that you make Christmas movies as well?
Yeah. So I don't see why a director has to be, locked into a particular genre. Sometimes, when you're so focused and you're such an expert in one narrow field, it's, it sort of draws you away from the bigger picture.
Oh, I 100% agree. You look at someone like Wes Craven, who, was known for horror, but he was able to squeeze in a film about a music teacher starring Meryl Streep. And, I believe, doing all types of films makes you a better filmmaker as well.
Yeah, and your sort of your own personal growth, is part of that.
I love.
You don't want to just do the same things over and over again. You like challenges. That's the point.
And it's the same in front of the camera. You have a lot of comedians who were like Robin Williams and Jim Carrey who did so much comedy. They wanted to try something different, and they did it successfully. And I think one of the reasons they were successful is they were paired with the right director that reeled them in. I think that relationship between filmmaker and actors is extremely important. It's and you have to control the actors as well. But it's one of the things I want to bring up is, what do you love most about being a filmmaker, and what kind of advice would you give to someone who's just starting out, who wants to be a filmmaker themselves?
What do I love most about?
It's a broad question, I know, but
well, it's just to be a filmmaker, you have to be kind of a student of life, student of film, a student of cinema all the time. It's like you can't stop learning. You sort of like, every day is a challenge. It never gets boring because there's always more and new things to learn. And that's how I've always been. I've always been like the guy who's curious and wants to know about everything and every aspect of everything. And filmmaking sort of affords me that. To investigate everything.
Right.
It's like even when you're, I don't know, this popped in my mind, when you're location scouting and, you go to some location and you find out the sort of behind the scenes workings of some sort of everyday thing, like I remember in Rome when we shot there, location scouting, and we wanted to use this particular famous fountain, the Trevi Fountain, and they took us in the behind the scenes of how the fountain worked and how it was built and all this kind of stuff, like stuff that you would never get a chance to do, You get behind the scenes. Or when I worked on a film that took place in a nuclear reactor, we actually visited a nuclear plant, like stuff like that.
Did you ever think that more than 3 decades later, you'd still be talking about The Gate?
I don't know, when Not really. It is a pleasant surprise, and I'm very thankful for all the love that it's been getting. But we always kind of knew that we were doing something special and different. Now, whether it would catch on or not, well, I know we would be talking among ourselves, the filmmakers, but because we did some crazy stuff there, and really took some big risks. I thought.
Well, I also think it's great that, Vestron Video had released in the last couple of years a collector's edition of The Gate, which is perfect for people who love the film. And that Shout Factory had released The Gate 2 on Blu-ray, as well as your film, I, Madman. Yeah. But I also want to state there's a lot of people out there who may have loved The Gate that probably never saw The Gate 2. And to make it easier for them, one thing I just recently discovered is Gate 2 is actually available for free on Amazon Prime for like the Prime members.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you've never seen Gate 2, hop on your Amazon and check it out. I love watching both films back to back and just seeing some of the characters grow. Mainly Tripp's character.
I don't know if people have. There's some interviews with Louis Tripp now today, and I think he's living in Australia. Have you seen that?
I believe he's actually working on a short film now. I think he's on a short film right now because I've been trying to look him up as well. I'd like to see what he's doing today. I'm curious.
I'm glad to see that because I always encourage the young actors that are really that I have a sense that are keen on filmmaking and we're paying attention to the process. I've always urged them to get behind the camera as well.
You see a lot of a lot of the actors who started out as kid actors, if they haven't left Hollywood for some reason, they wind up working behind the camera, whether it's as a producer, as a director. Exactly. You see that quite often, and I think that's a great progression. I want to thank you so much for joining us for this. The Gate meant a lot to me growing up. Getting the chance to talk to you and share this with our audience is a great thing. And we hope that this isn't the last we hear of The Gate. We hope it opens up again sometime in the near future.
All right.
And if you want to tell us a little bit about what you have coming up, what your next upcoming projects are, so the audience can look out for it.
Well, there's all my Christmas movies and family stuff, but I've got a few things in development. I'm reading a Western right now. I'm going to conquer all genres.
You got to do it. You got to do it. Thank you so much, Tibor. Yeah. This was amazing.
All right. Great. Thank you.